All right. So, hello everyone. Um, So just before we get started, it's probably important that where's my button? There we go. Important to acknowledge that the land I'm on, anyhow, is unceded territory of Coast Salish peoples here in Western Canada. Specifically, where I live is the territory of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. What we are going to be talking about before we get to that, hello. My name is Jack. I'm originally from Ireland. There's supposed to be an Irish tricolour next to that word biased. Every day, Unicode moves further from the light of ASCII. But we're going to be talking about Irish and English relations, Irish and British relations today. And it's important to acknowledge that because of my background, there's going to be an inherent level of bias. We'll try not to go into it too much, but it is what it is. I grew up with computers, was kind of got into it at a young age, and it's gone from one place to another. At the minute, I'm doing kind of information security. Um, of course, as with any of these things, any opinions today are mine, not that of any employers. And personally, I'm a big fan of learn by teaching. In my off time, I teach some rock climbing classes, like rope safety, and it's a great way of keeping skills up in that regard. And so put this forward on the notice that I'm relatively new to this, so if there's any mistakes or corrections needed, just bear with me. We are very briefly going to talk about where these telegrams came from, why we're talking about this at all. Then we're going to look at cryptography itself. Where did it come from? What followed cryptography was cryptanalysis, because if somebody's made a code, it's worth breaking. So we'll see how that developed prior to the invention of computers, some basic approaches to code breaking. We're then going to take a look at the telegrams themselves, and then we'll take questions at the end. These telegrams are courtesy of this guy, Michael Casey. He prefers if I call him Dad, but he is very into Irish history and is writing a book on the suffragette movement at the moment. And so while he was digging around in the archives during COVID, that's where he found these encrypted telegrams. There are many places you can start the story. We are starting the story in 1913. It was around this time that there was a strong push in Ireland and in the UK for women's suffrage, the right to vote. And things had progressed past the peaceful protest point of the discussion. And a few women were going around breaking windows of Dublin Castle to try and escalate the protest. And 5 were arrested. As with any civil rights issue, this is a pretty sensitive topic. You don't really want this getting willy-nilly into the press. It can cause all sorts of kerfuffles, as we see today. That story never changes. And so because this took place in Ireland, which was had kind of colony status at the time, or you had cases where the British establishment were employing locals to help with whatever it may be it like farming or communications or transport. And so you end up in a situation where one group of British officials will need to get a message to another. And so they'll use telegrams, given the era. But these telegrams would be sent by Irish operators. And for that reason, anything sensitive would either need a different route to get to headquarters, or would have to be encrypted to avoid leaks. And this was was considered such a sensitive issue that the prison was asked to send daily reports to the castle, just to ensure that there was no mistreatment and that there was no issues that they weren't aware of. Why do we care about British telegrams? We don't. We do. It's more of a case that the story remains the same. Any mistakes that are made in cryptography today have been made for the last 2,000 years. And it's much easier to talk about military communications that are a century old, because if I was to do this for anything in today's world, 1, it would be a lot harder, and 2, I'd probably end up in prison. So best avoided. Why do we care about cryptography at all? Secret messages are cool. We knew this as children. This book was my introduction to the concept. This is a book by an Irish author. Made a great series of kids' books. I'm told someday it'll be turned into movies, but that remains to be seen. And along the bottom page of pretty much the entire book, there is these series of symbols. And if you manage to decode them, there's a second story in there. So one, it's good value, and two, it's just kind of engaging. In particular, this one is not based on the English alphabet, which is interesting because some of the techniques we're going to look at later rely on knowing what language the plain text is in. And just as a bit of lingo, plain text just means the message, the thing that you're trying to say. Ciphertext is the encoded message that you actually send. The idea being that if somebody captures that, there's no problem here. The key is the password to either create the ciphertext or to decode it. And then cipher or code is used to refer to like the type of code or the paradigm or protocol that we'd use. Why overall, like it's why do we use this? Because it's one thing to keep children engaged. It serves very serious purposes for militaries to be able to communicate securely amongst themselves, but also that were these to fall into enemy hands, that you don't let the enemy know what you know. There's the whole game that gets played there. Less seriously, there's secret societies make use of these, be it the Freemasons. They have, I'm very told, very secret pancake recipes. There was a pottery recipe found that was encoded from like, I think it was pre-Roman, like it was ancient, but it was considered important enough and was enough of a competitive edge for the clay maker that he didn't want that to become public knowledge. Love notes, we've seen that throughout the ages. It's so useful that even evolution has come up with it. I'm not a biologist. I'm pretty far from a biologist, but there is a line of thinking as to how the sclera in human eyes developed, in that we are such absurdly social animals that being able to tell where somebody is looking is useful, because they might be hunting something or what have you. Whereas prior to that, there was enough of a downside in the information you give away that animals tended not to develop very visible sclera. I don't know if there's anything to this, but it's certainly a theory that kind of mirrors the utility of it. As we said before, this thing has been around forever. One of the most famous ciphers is a thing called the Caesar cipher, as far as we know, developed by Caesar, or developed, certainly used by Caesar. It remained unbroken as far as I know, and as far as the records I've been able to find, until about 800 years later. There was a Arab scholar whose name, Al-Kindi, apologies now if I've messed that pronunciation up, but around 900 CE broke the Caesar cipher. But it remained in use, certainly until many centuries later. And even after it was broken, and even into kind of the modern age, it's such an easy cipher to use computationally. It'll get used even though it has been broken. And the cipher we're going to look at today is even simpler than Caesar. So there's a time and a place for this kind of thing. This continued largely without too many developments up until kind of the turn of the 20th century. At this point, there was very much a culture of intelligence in Europe, and the various intelligence departments would have been using different ciphers. Then World War II, all hell broke loose with the development of Enigma. It was such a new class of cipher that to break it, computers were pretty much required. And so that's what we saw with Turing and the gang at Bletchley Park. And then typically this part is, we say, into the future, which I think is unfair, because I've been hearing about like quantum resistant encryption for as long as I've been paying attention. And so it's kind of here. There is like Shor's algorithm was developed in 1995. We just didn't have the computers to run it. It's here. I'm not here to talk about it, but there certainly will be interesting developments in the very near future, if not already happened, and will come to light. We'll see. So Caesars and ciphers. Sometimes they don't have to be crazy complicated. If it's easy to implement and it's hard to get it wrong, then it's useful. especially when anybody trying to decrypt this is probably illiterate. So Caesar was dealing with a different threat model at the time. On the slide here, we have what's called 3 to the left, which would be E becoming B. Caesar himself was fond of 3 to the right, so the letter C would become the letter F. His nephew, I think, used 1 to the left. There's a few variations on it. On the right-hand side here, you have another cipher that was made popular by The Wire, great TV show if you haven't seen it. And it was used to encode phone numbers to not give the game away as to who you're calling at a given time. And that one is absurdly simple. You take the number you want to dial, or you take the number that's on the sheet of paper, you hop over the 5, and that's the real number that you dial. 5 and 0 swap places, and then Bob's your uncle. So on this particular example, we have 02457, that'd be your plain text, and then what you'd write down on a bit of paper would be 58603. So yeah, quick note on these. Apologies for the pictures. These are taken through, I think, a display case with plastic packaging, and these are then screenshots of it. You know, it's taken during COVID. We haven't been able to go back and get better ones. Also to note, we had a head start with this, given that the telegrams were stored with a clear text copy of the minutes of the meeting. Typically, that won't happen, but sometimes it does. There's a huge vulnerability in any cryptographic system. If you have the plain text and the ciphertext at the same time, it makes analyzing it a lot easier. We also saw different copies of the same telegram. So this one might be slightly easier to see, but the letters seem to be grouped into groups of 5. There's definitely ciphers that rely on that only work on messages that are of length 5, or are otherwise would be related to this. This is a bit of a red herring in this case, as we'll see in a minute. So I've just transcribed the message here, and there's a few things we can have a look at. One is that groupings that we'd look at before, so I've just spread them out here to kind of copy that over. And the other parts are, some of these are English words, so referring to themselves. There's a few reasons why this might be. I'm inclined towards human nature being lazy. Encrypting is work. It slows down, it takes time. If the word doesn't give any information away, do we have to encrypt it? It's the same logic behind the words that are left unredacted in classified documents, or rather documents that have been unclassified. It's possible there's a human error here, but I go for the idea that, like, we're just going to encrypt names, places, things that are useful to people who might be reading this. I think that's all we'll get from this. 2 approaches we're going to take to code breaking. One is frequency analysis, and the other one is a known plain text, which may seem like cheating, but not all of the time. So here we have frequency analysis. On the left-hand side there in that table, I've counted up all of the instances of each letter, and we have the top 8. And then on the right-hand side, we have the top 8 letters that get used in the English alphabet. And you can see there's a little bit of a mapping. U maybe maps to E. Then there's a few that like are kind of similar values that could get mixed up. Through the magic of editing presentations, we're going to see how this approach does. And it turns out 2 of them are correct and the rest are just wrong. So U in fact does map to E, H does map to N, which is to say that like a U in the plain text or a U in the message that you're sending becomes an E in the encoded message that you transmit. But it's not great. It turns out that this particular cipher is what's called a monoalphabetical substitution cipher, which has many words to say all of the letters are encoded with the same key. With something like Caesar, each letter is encoded slightly differently. So like an A would become one letter, but then later on the message, it would become a different letter. Because this only uses one alphabet, we can try and solve it piecewise, where we put in letters that we know or suspect and see if words emerge. Because if you get like elementary and you get all of the E's, you can have a look. Little bit of a guessing game, a little bit of luck. But another approach we have is if we know these telegrams are referring to specific prisoners or to a specific location, we can use that information to try and make our lives a bit easier. This is actually part of how Enigma was cracked. Whether you're signing off a message with page H or you are including a weather report, there's going to be specific words like cloudy, rainy, what have you. In this case, we have some prisoner names with very useful letters in it. For example, Barbara there at the bottom, we have 3 A's in one word and spaced in a very kind of noticeable pattern. That would be useful for a known or guessed plaintext analysis. In this example, we're looking at Kathleen Emerson. We got all them E's there. And it turns out, if we say referring to something, we have U's in the exact same location. And so if we have a look back at our frequency analysis here, okay, we can be pretty reasonably sure that E matches up. And then taking from this, we can extrapolate. K probably maps to K, Y probably maps to A, and so on and so forth. So if we proceed accordingly, we can kind of work out a key and start decrypting the message. And it's kind of like spot the difference that you do as a child. You see what fits and then amend the key that you have come up with and keep going. So here we have, referring to Kathleen Emerson in today's Freeman, have prisoners themselves made any complaints about... So that can't be right. What's going on here? There's a few different reasons that this could be. There are certainly ciphers that have a limited size of key. So there's 2 in particular, take keys of 25 characters. English alphabet having 26 characters doesn't play ball very well. And so I and J are usually combined on the idea that you should be able to tell if it's supposed to be an I or a J. I don't think that's the case here because the cipher in use doesn't have that limitation. It is possible that this was just part of the culture. I and J are equivalent when you're doing encryptions, and that way it's one less decision for the human to make and one less error for the human to make. Personally, I am guessing that the I and the K in the key were supposed to be swapped because a letter mapping to itself you might try and avoid that. I think this one is an open question, but certainly for this message, I'm going to say that any J in the message that makes no sense, that should probably be an I. And this can be confirmed because there is no I in the cipher text. At no point is there any letter that maps to I. And for this particular cipher, that means you can't have the letter I in the message. So hence we're finding J's. This would not be the first time that a notable cryptographer has made an error. Here we have Kryptos, which is a very famous sculpture in the Central Intelligence Agency's lunch garden. It's split into 4 quadrants. The 4th one relies on the previous 3 being broken. There's a hint in the message that will help you decode the 4th. And it turns out there was an error. The guy that sculpted it, Jim Sanborn, he missed a letter when he was creating the 2nd quadrant that led to an incorrect decoded message and led to the 4th one being impossible to solve. So he issued a correction in the early 2000s to make this public so that the 4th one could at some point be broken. It has yet to be broken, so it's still a mystery. On a side note, if anybody would like to buy me lunch at the CIA, you call me. You call me. So here we have the final telegram. Referring to Kathleen Emerson in today's Freeman, have the prisoners themselves made any complaints about the visiting box as alleged, and is not the visiting room the same as that was used by ordinary political prisoners, cattle driver, etc.? So this may or may not make much sense. Cattle drivers were a type of protester at the time, political activist, and part of the friction at this time was that the suffragette prisoners wanted to be treated as political prisoners because they didn't see themselves as criminals breaking windows. They saw themselves as political protesters demanding change. And so that's why it was important to them that they'd be treated in one way rather than another. And they were very successful. And they certainly won the fight. And they were won status of political prisoner. They were allowed visitors. They were given things like flowers in their rooms or like better pillows. They got to wear their own clothes as opposed to uniforms. Visitors who brought cameras. This is some of the gang here. And long term, it had a huge impact. It was part of the zeitgeist for that decade. Women's suffrage and the right to vote was promised as part of what ultimately failed in the Easter Rising in 1916. But Countess Markievicz was elected to Westminster, being the first woman to do so. And then after Irish independence, equal like parliamentary suffrage was granted in 1922, and has been ever since. So we have the centenary this year. And that's me. Yeah, if you are looking to get in contact, I'm not so much on the social media these days, but email is a solid. I will eventually see it on Twitter. But yeah, we'll go from there if anyone has any questions. I see one that was asking how long a modern computer would take to crack such code. And I didn't actually check, but the answer is like microseconds. There is really a very short number of possibilities. Even the length of the message is quite short. Any modern ciphers will use rounds and iterations, and that's part of what helps bring about their security. Yeah, it would be seconds. And then there was a question that was just any resources to learn more about cryptography. There is a really good book called Applied Cryptography that gets a bit heavy, but is quite good. Otherwise, I would honestly say get an Artemis Fowl book and figure out the story along the bottom. I can't even remember the story itself, but it's that to me gave me the basics of like the idea behind the whole thing. And then certainly you can look at more modern ciphers. I do look forward to the AES 256 crypto talk from 500 years from now. Oh, sorry, I probably should have mentioned it was not Kilmainham jail. It was Tullamore prison or Tullamore jail. So it would have been in County Offaly. I think we actually have it on the map here. So telegrams would have been between Tullamore prison in the kind of the middle of the country to Dublin Castle over on the east coast. Just having to scroll through in case I missed any. Alrighty, I think that's me. Thank you very much to B-Sides for having me, and yeah, enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks so much, Jack. That was really awesome.
Great.
All right. So if anyone has any more questions for Jack, there will be a Q&A, and you can just go on in there and reply directly. Otherwise, just enjoy the rest of the conference, and we will hopefully see you tomorrow night.
We shall see. Yeah, I'll get back to you on that.
For sure. All right. Have a good one.
Take care.
Bye-bye.